shore so we can head out.
Shipwrecked 64 was released on to critical acclaim. Based on Broadside Entertainment's Bucky the Beaver franchise, the game was a little but it was eventually leading to essentially well-received. Shipwrecked 64 never should have looked it. Shipwrecked 64 critical acclaim. Broadside 64 Bucky the Beaver never took it off. Ever and less Olive Otter shaking his head against the glass for hours.
Have you heard of a starling? Turn the page.
The game begins with a series of disturbing, compressed photos depicting Bucky the Beaver and his friends Olive Otter and Giovanni Goose out at sea on a fishing trip when a storm blows in, wrecking the trio on a dangerous desert island full of vicious, hungry wolves. The shipwreck scatters the friends, and Bucky awakens alone on the beach. Traversing the island, he soon encounters Wolf, the wolf. The savage canine predator and his pack have commandeered Bucky's boat, and they intend to put the three to work as punishment for rudely wrecking upon their island.
Oh, what do we got here? I've already put all your other friends to work, but I think I can do just the same for you, buddy.
You will suffocate.
Now, a little while away from here, there's a fort that's laid abandoned for a very long time now. And inside of that, mounds of treasure. Gather at least 40 of it, and then bring it back to me and give you your boat back. How's that sound, buddy? Eye for an eye. Go on, get moving.
However, upon entering the fort, the game's mood takes a sudden shift. Gone are the cheerful music and happy graphics. Instead, we're in a dark, dimly lit dungeon, opening a series of treasure chests before the timer can run out. It seems straightforward enough, but upon wandering around for a little bit, one starts to hear static in the distance. When Rex Broadside first created Bucky the Beaver, he never could have imagined that it would lead to a massive Disney-style resort in the Bahamas. It was surreal seeing suited mascots of his characters wandering the park grounds, interacting with guests, posing for photos, and of course, peddling merchandise. Rex hated it. Deep down, he saw the park as a mockery of his characters. He saw it as a symbol of his increasing irrelevance to his own company, his own creation. Heck, at one point, the park even ran an ad campaign featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Rex would eventually pass away from illness, estranged from his family, and surrounded by yes-men who sought only to profit off of his name and life's work. Upon gathering all of the treasure and completing the minigame, we witness the following cutscene.
Oh, would you look at that? Oh, you've done yourself well today. You can have your boat back. I don't mind at all, really.
With his boat reclaimed, Bucky heads further into the island and encounters Olive Otter, who, like Bucky, has also been put to work by the mean wolves.
Bucky! Hey! So, we're being held on probation, apparently? So they want me to gather around 20 coconuts, but I can't find any. Do you think you can help?
Collecting the coconuts is pretty straightforward. Like the fort section, the timer is very generous, and it's basically impossible to fetch.
Watch it! Perfect! Thank you! I'll meet you at the shore so we can head out.
Olivia Finch was hired to play Olive Otter at Broadside Beach, and while she expressed frustration at having to wear the hot, stuffy costume all day, she definitely appreciated some of the luxuries that living at a resort in the Bahamas entailed. However, she noticed that her colleague, Brandon Lester, who wore the Bucky costume, was weird. He never took it off, ever. Even worse, he had a habit of creepily showing up at her residence at night and just staring through the window. Things escalated though, and one night Brandon just stood there, smashing his head against the glass for hours, leaving behind a gross stain. Olivia would file a formal complaint about Brandon's behavior, but before anything could be done,
he showed up at the door again. I don't know what to do. Something about him just felt wrong.
After that day, nobody saw Olivia again. The olive otter suit started to decay, almost as if it was organic. Upon gathering all the coconuts for Olivia, she heads to the beach to prepare for departure, whilst Bucky moves further inland, encountering Walter Walrus, a friend of the crew who also found themselves shipwrecked on the same island. He tasks Bucky with retrieving his boat, but Walter gives the beaver an ominous warning beforehand.
Bucky, listen, I really need your help. I had a really bad boat accident, like you did, but with my own boat, hence why I'm here. My boat is stuck on the top of a hill and I need you to get it down for me. Just don't move it if it ever gets dark. There's a lot of strange things around here.
Walter's level necessitates completing a 3D platforming segment with a twist. The screen will periodically go dark, during which Bucky cannot move. If he does, well... On June 28, 1990 at 11:53 p.m., Broadside animator Nathan Stewart entered the office to send a late-night email. However, he wasn't alone. Upon retrieving the boat, Walter is overjoyed.
Whoa, you did it! Thank you so much, Bucky. I knew I could count on you. Alright, I'm gonna go run up to the shore now and hope you get back.
However, before they can leave, Bucky needs to find Giovanni Goose, who the wolves have put to work cooking.
Oh, look who decided to show up. Bit late to the party, aren't you? Listen, I was cooking some stuff for the wolves. They're getting a little hungry right now. But, I left the oven on. Multiple of them. But, can you go in there and just turn it off for me whenever they start to smoke? Thank you.
In Giovanni's minigame, Bucky must circle the kitchen, turning off ovens before they catch fire. The best strategy is to just circle the room, turning the ovens off as you see them begin to Gary Wilson was a Broadside Beach employee hired as a mascot handler. On January 3rd, 1990, after completing his shift inside the Giovanni Goose costume, Gary found himself starving and stumbled into the kitchen to grab a bite to eat. With his back turned to the door, he didn't see Bucky, or Brandon, sneaking up behind him. Okay guys, listen, you don't need to like the video, you don't need to subscribe. Just this one time, it doesn't mean that you hate puppies and kittens. Instead, you need to go to the Steam page for Shipwrecked 64 and add it to your wish list. Also, if you don't, you hate puppies and kittens.
You don't love me!
With all of Bucky's friends saved and their ship reclaimed, the beaver heads back to the beach where his boat awaits. And just like that, Bucky and his friends said... In Shipwrecked 64, nothing is as it appears to be. At the surface, it seems like a really straightforward shovelware N64 game, but it doesn't take that much digging to realize that there's something else hidden within this game. Something horrifying. Upon failing Olive Otter's minigame, the following door unlocks. It's got a sign in front of it that reads, "Oh, that's a game theory. Pat, I found a game theory. I need your help." Okay, so it says Layer 2, Room 1. Initially, we find ourselves in some sort of locker room, but upon navigating further, we see that actually we're in the back rooms. Further along, we find Olive Otter standing there, and when we approach and interact with her, Starling application form. Starlings have gone from a small idea and experiment to an essential part of a broadside vacation. As a result, they are very expensive to create and even more expensive to destroy. By signing this form, you hereby swear at risk of termination that this starling has been checked, tested, and is healthy and in a sound enough state that it will not attack any nearby guests, residents, staff, or animals. Penalties will be issued if this responsibility is mishandled. Olivia Finch. Cause of death: drowned. Target: Olive Otter. Deformities: teeth. Pending removal. Verdict: successful. Starlings. Somehow, Olivia is still operating the Olive Otter costume even after death. Both her body as well as the costume are experiencing substantial deformities, yet Broadside Entertainment still seems to consider this a success, with someone named Johnson having signed off on it. For the rest of the game, Olive Otter will actually follow Bucky, though it seems that something happened to her eyes. Upon failing Giovanni Goose's minigame enough times, the chef disappears and we're granted access to the next room in Layer 2, an art gallery full of Broadside-related photos. After attempting to jump into all the paintings, because of course you have to try that, it's an N64 game, that's what you do, you jump into paintings. Bucky comes across Giovanni, standing next to a burning stove. Like Olive Otter before him, speaking to the goose within Layer 2 reveals yet another Starling application form. Gary Wilson died of severe burns. His face is missing, save for a fork sticking out of the goose's eye. Verdict: must be refined. Apparently, even Broadside Entertainment recognized that this thing was not ready to be around guests. Finally, upon failing Walter Walrus's minigame enough times, it unlocks yet another room in Layer 2, a strange canal featuring a large Upon failing Walter Walrus's minigame enough times, it unlocks yet another room in Layer 2, a strange canal featuring a large stone statue of Bucky. Crossing the water leads us to Walter Walrus and our final Starling application form. Nathan Stewart. Cause of death: assault. Deformities: bleeding. Verdict: needs work. As Bucky leaves the canal, in the distance, we see a windmill fall. Three characters, Bucky's three victims. With their brutal deaths at the hands of the beaver mascot having been covered up by Broadside Entertainment, their bodies were used in these Starling experiments. This brought them back to life. It resurrected them from the dead, but at a terrible, terrible cost. However, what about Bucky? What about Brandon Lester, the man inside the costume? Who is he, and why is he killing all of these people? Upon leaving the island with all of the Starling application forms, instead of being shown the normal ending and returning to the title screen, we find ourselves in a strange wooden hallway. Bucky's colors are wrong. However, upon exiting the room, we're just back on the beach, having emerged from one of the many inaccessible cabanas littered throughout the game. Bucky doesn't need to walk far to find the first of these strange statues, which play a series of recordings between Broadside executive Mark Mullins and Shipwrecked 64's developer, Connor Thomas. Considering Mark's company has funded the entire project, Connor is obliged to give him a progress update on the game. Furthermore, Mark mentions that he's bringing Brandon over to film a commercial.
I'll be bringing Brandon over to film the commercial, like you asked. Oh, already? You did ask for it.
Hey, everyone! I need your help!
Step into the 3D realm with Bucky and his friends. Explore a vast open island, and hopefully bring your friends back to safety.
So what do you say, buddy? Let's go rescue the gang!
Brandon's presence seems to make Connor uneasy. It's like Connor knows that something isn't right with that dude. In the next tape, we hear Connor teaching Mark how to hold the awkwardly shaped N64 controller before the latter begins to play and criticize the game.
Yeah, now move the joystick around.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. He's walking. Connor, look, it doesn't even look like Bucky.
What?
Buddy, you know what I mean. Just look, this is Bucky. This is the face millions around the world recognize as a pop culture icon. That is a beaver in a blue suit.
Furthermore, Mark is distraught upon seeing that Connor has made the antagonist of the game this random wolf that has no history with Broadside Entertainment.
Connor, you're telling me with the vast amount of characters that we own, you picked up some random wolf and dropped him into the game? We're not making this game for your son, Connor. We're making this game for the millions of people who look up to our brand! With all due respect, this is... Connor, just... Look, I'll give it to you straight. Do you have any idea how much money your company sunk into...
When we return to the game, we find that the music has been entirely replaced with a disconcerting crackling noise.
Do you really think we can extend our generosity to you for that much longer to create this, I don't know, what do you call it, a game? I can't even tell. I'm saying we're done. We're not putting up with this project anymore. Unless you can pitch something to us that is the technical marvel you describe, I don't want to see it. We cannot keep sinking money into this. Get the fuck out!
Mark Mullins is a suspicious man. Having taken control of Broadside Entertainment in the wake of the founder Rex's death, the company began to languish, bleeding money left and right. However, it was on Broadside Beach that Mark found something alive beneath the sands. Brandon Lester was hired to play Bucky, but shortly after arriving on the island, he was found dead of an opioid overdose. Hoping to avoid any negative publicity, Mark and his accomplices exposed Brandon's body to the parasites on the island, infecting him and turning him into a starling. This fascinated Mark Mullins. Brandon had been dead, his body cold, yet now he was alive again. Sure, he was mutated and horrifying and would eventually go on a murder spree, but he was alive. Between this discovery and Broadside's dire financial situation, Mark Mullins came up with a terrifying idea.
Let's get down to business. Have you heard of a starling? It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? It reminds you of Beauty, right? Well, in reality, they are the very mascots that roam around our parks. Under that costume is a starling, controlling it and manipulating it without any human influence. They also use the costume as a skin so that they don't receive infection. You may have even run into one around the office, but that's besides the point. With our starling creation process, we are able to, effectively, create immortality. We have a plan. Do any of you guys remember Rex? Well, if we want to outperform Disney, we need our founder to be here and to be alive.
He intended to use the Starling project to bring Rex Broadside back to life, where he could be installed as an attraction at the company's latest venture, Studio Grounds. As children entered the park, they would be greeted by the creator of Bucky himself. Surely that would put the animation studio back on top. Or at least that's what Mark thought, but people would probably just be like, what the f***? Because at this point, Rex Broadside's death by natural causes was well known, and this is why Brandon never took the Bucky suit off, why he'd creepily show up at Olivia's apartment at night and stare at her, and ultimately why he killed them all. That wasn't Brandon anymore. It wasn't even human. It was a starling. The flesh of Brandon's corpse fused with the rubber costume and mutated into a nightmarish, rotting, living abomination. The same thing happened to his victims. Olivia's corpse was used to create the Olive Starling. Gary Wilson's mutilated body was used to bring life to Giovanni Goose, and Nathan Stewart's office chair smashed face lies behind the Starling that wears the skin of Walter Walrus. Enraged by Mark's cancellation of Shipwrecked 64, Connor embedded the dark secrets of Broadside Beach into the game cartridge. Horrified by the gruesome truth behind the park's mascots and the associated Starling project, the disgraced developer leaves the game's source code to his son before climbing to the roof of his house. The full version of Shipwrecked 64 is currently in development, but it's going to be out really soon. Please add the game to your wishlist on Steam. Today is my friend Squeaks' birthday, and he made the game, and I know it would really make his day. Also, if you have a VR headset, check out Squeaks' other game, Polar Dread. It's free. Anyway, thanks for watching.